Silence shattered as the Odyssey's comm system erupted with static, then words, clear as cryo-chamber glass. "We are not alone." Captain Elias Voss's fingers dug into the console, his breath fogging the screen where the AI traced the signal's path. Earth, a graveyard they'd mourned for 100 years. The ship's lights flickered like a failing heartbeat as stasis pods hissed open one by one, crew members staggering into the dim glow, their faces etched with the same question. Outside the viewport, the void pressed closer, colder. Something in that signal didn't just speak, it waited. The stasis haze clung to them like a second skin, slow breaths turning to frost in the recycled air. Around the command deck, groans mixed with the creak of stiff limbs as the crew of the Odyssey shook off a century of frozen sleep. Lieutenant Chen gripped the edge of a console, his knuckles white, not just from weakness but the voice crackling through the speakers. That same phrase, looping, the AI painted the coordinates across the main screen in jagged red lines, converging on the frozen edge of the system, near Pluto. Engineer Kira Volkov's hands flew over the diagnostics panel, her brow furrowing as the readouts pulsed erratic. "These energy patterns, they don't match natural decay," she said, her voice tight. Someone boosted this signal, pushed it far enough to reach us, a beat of silence heavy as deep space radiation. Then the autopilot thrummed to life, thrusters firing as the ship pivoted toward the outer dark. No vote, no debate, just that hollow voice from a dead world and the unspoken truth hanging between them. Beacons weren't meant for the lost, they were for hunters. The Odyssey shuddered as it dropped out of warp, Pluto's pale blue glow bathing the observation deck in an eerie light. The derelict station hung in orbit like a broken toy, its hull twisted with gashes that gleamed under the ship's spotlight's clean cuts, deliberate. No meteor strikes, no accidents. Medic Jax Renner's fingers trembled over the scanner. "Captain," he murmured, voice tight, "there's a life sign, faint, but someone's alive in there." The crew exchanged glances, the weight of the unspoken pressing down. A century adrift in the void, and humanity's last whisper came from this graveyard of steel. Captain Voss adjusted his sidearm, the click of the safety echoing through the silent deck. "Boarding party suits up," he ordered, eyes never leaving the station. "Renner, Volkov, Chen with me, and stay sharp." The tension coiled like a spring as the airlock cycled open, its hiss the only sound in the void. Beyond the threshold, shadows swallowed the corridor whole, the station's dead lights flickering like dying stars. Something moved in the dark, not a rat, not random debris, something waiting. The Odyssey's beacon had brought them here, but the real message wasn't in words. It was in the silence between the screams. The air stank of burnt insulation and stale sweat as the boarding party's boots clanged against the station's warped deck plating. There, curled in the flickering red glow of emergency lights, Dr. Leora Kane looked less like a survivor and more like a ghost, her face sallow, her jumpsuit streaked with old blood. Her fingers spasmed around the data drive, its casing cracked and pulsing faint blue. When she lifted her head, the whites of her eyes were veined with burst capillaries. "They're coming back," she rasped, the words scraping raw from her throat. Medic Renner dropped to her side, scanner whirring, but she batted it away with surprising strength. "No time, you don't understand," the station groaned around them, a sound like bending bone. Then the lights died. For 3 heartbeats there was only blackness and the crew's ragged breathing. When the backups flared on, the corridor behind them was no longer empty. Shadows pooled too thickly there, clinging to the walls in ways that defied the angle of the light. Captain Voss didn't hesitate. He yanked Kane upright, her breath hot, and panicked against his neck as he shouted, "We have to go now." The ceiling split with a metallic scream, raining shrapnel. Chen barely ducked in time, a jagged spar embedding itself where his head had been. Volkov fired up her wrist beacon, the beam cutting through swirling dust, and for half a second, it illuminated something massive shifting in the wreckage. Not human, not anything from Earth. Then the floor buckled, and the only thought left was run. The Odyssey's engines roared as the deck tilted sharply, throwing the crew against harnesses and consoles. Kane's fingers trembled over the data drive, its holographic schematics flickering above the command table, a monstrous tangle of coiled energy conduits and humming containment fields. "This was the last thing we built," she said, her voice raw, the only thing that hurt them. The screen flared red as three angular ships materialized from warp, their silhouettes slicing through the void like blades. No transponders, no hail, just the cold certainty of pursuit. Voss slammed his palm onto the comm. All hands brace for evasive. The Odyssey banked hard, Pluto's gravity well yanking at their hull as the first volley of plasma fire streaked past the viewport. Static exploded across the speakers, then a voice, synthesized and icy. "Surrender the asset." Kane's face went slack. "They're not just following us," she whispered. "They're hurting us." Volkov's hands danced over the nav console, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Captain, there's a debris field ahead, old mining rigs. If we can lose them in the wreckage." A proximity alert shrieked. One of the alien ships had pivoted, cutting off their escape vector. Chen cursed, pulling up tactical. "They're not shooting to kill, they're boxing us in." The realization settled like a weight. This wasn't an attack, it was a trap, methodical and precise. And Kane, her hand still clenched around the drive, was the bait. The Odyssey shuddered again, a fresh impact rocking the starboard thrusters. Somewhere deep in the ship, metal groaned. Voss tightened his grip on the command rail. "Then we don't run," he said quietly. "We fight." The crew froze. Even Kane looked up, her eyes wide. With what? A half-built weapon and a ship held together by prayers. Voss didn't blink. With whatever's left. Outside, the void yawned, endless and cold, and in its depths something darker stirred. The alien weapons tore through the Odyssey with terrifying precision, not just piercing the shields but unraveling them, like a scalpel slicing through wet cloth. The ship lurched violently as crimson energy bolts hammered the hull, each impact sending shockwaves through the deck plates, shields at 30%. Volkov's voice cracked over the din of klaxons, her fingers flying across the engineering console. "They're targeting the power grid. This isn't random fire." Voss gripped the command rail, knuckles white. "Helm hard to port. Give me a debris blind spot." The Odyssey twisted, thrusters screaming, but the alien ships matched the maneuver effortlessly. One of their shots grazed the primary engine array, and suddenly the ship was listing, artificial gravity stuttering as the deck pitched beneath their feet. In the chaos, Renner caught the flicker of movement at the AI terminal, Kane's fingers darting across the interface, her lips moving silently. He lunged forward, grabbing her wrist. "What are you doing?" The words came out sharper than he intended. She turned, and the look in her eyes stopped him cold. Not fear, calculation. "Buying us time," she said, yanking free. The AI screen flared to life, streams of code cascading faster than human eyes could follow. Then the Odyssey's external speakers crackled, broadcasting a burst of noise, not static but something structured, rhythmic. Almost like a language. Outside, the lead alien ship faltered, its smooth pursuit stuttering for the barest second. Voss didn't waste the opening. "Now, Kira." Full burn on the auxiliaries, the Odyssey surged forward, but the reprieve was short-lived. The alien vessels recovered too quickly, their formation tightening like a noose. Kane's shoulders slumped. "It won't hold them, they adapt too fast." The AI screen flashed a warning, an incoming transmission, untranslated except for two looping words, "Terminate." "Recover," Chen paled. "They're not just trying to kill us, they want her." His gaze flicked to Kane, then to the cracked data drive still clutched in her hand. The weight of it settled over the bridge. Whatever that drive held, it was worth more than their lives. Then the lights died. The consoles flickered once, twice, and plunged into darkness. Somewhere deep in the ship, metal screamed, not the sound of weapons fire, something worse, something moving. Renner's breath fogged in the sudden cold. "Captain," he whispered, "we're not alone on this ship anymore." The emergency lights flared back on, just in time to see the ventilation grate above them shudder, its bolts shearing loose one by one. Kane's fingers moved with desperate precision, punching codes into the drive even as the Odyssey shuddered under another salvo. The station's reactor core flared on the main screen, a pulsing red heart wrapped in warnings. "This isn't a failsafe," she muttered, more to herself than the crew. "It's a detonator." The console beeped once, sharp and final, and her hand froze over the execute command. For a breath, silence, then she slammed her palm down. The station's outer hull erupted in a wave of white fire, the shockwave slamming into the pursuing ships like a hammer. Two vanished instantly, their sleek forms crumpling into molten scrap. The Odyssey groaned as the blast caught its tail, sending consoles spitting sparks as the artificial gravity wavered. Chen swore, wresting the helm control back from the turbulence. "We're clear, but that third one's still on us." Kira's hands clenched around her console, her face illuminated by the dying light of the explosion. "She knew," she whispered. "Kane knew they'd chase us, that drive. It's not just data, it's a beacon." The remaining ship banked hard, its alien silhouette cutting through the debris field with eerie grace. No hesitation, no damage, just relentless pursuit. Voss didn't turn from the screen. His reflection flickered in the glass, overlaid with the shrinking wreckage of the station, and Kane's last act burning bright in the dark. His voice was gravel. "Plot a course for the weapon's coordinates, maximum burn." The crew exchanged glances, no questions, no protests, only the unspoken understanding that survival wasn't the goal anymore. Not after what they'd seen, not after what they'd lost. The Odyssey's engines screamed as it leapt toward the void, the pursuing ship a shadow at its back. Somewhere ahead, in the black between stars, the thing that could hurt their hunters waited, and this time they wouldn't run. They'd drag the monsters into the light. The lunar bunker's airlock hissed open, revealing a cavernous chamber bathed in the cold blue glow of emergency lights. Dust motes swirled in the beams of their helmet lamps, catching on the jagged edges of broken consoles and overturned equipment. The place felt less like a refuge and more like a tomb, one left in a hurry. Dr. Kane's coordinates had led them here, to the heart of a facility buried deep beneath the moon's scarred surface. There, Chen rasped, pointing to a massive vault door at the far end of the room, its surface etched with faded warnings. The weapon. Volkov didn't wait for orders. She sprinted ahead, her gloved fingers flying over the access panel. The door groaned, its hydraulics protesting after decades of disuse, then slid open with a shudder. Inside, suspended in a nest of cables and humming containment fields, was the device, a sleek, oblong core pulsing with an eerie harmonic frequency. The sound made Voss's teeth ache. Kane wasn't lying, Renner breathed, stepping closer. "It's like it's singing." A proximity alert blared through their comms. The alien ship had breached lunar orbit, its silhouette blotting out the stars on the bunker's external feeds. "We're out of time," Voss snapped. "Jax, help Kira disengage the cradle. Chen, cover that corridor." The crew moved like parts of a machine, each motion precise, desperate. The device's harmonics intensified as Volkov wrestled it free, the sound vibrating through their suits like a second heartbeat. Then the first drone sliced through the airlock. It moved too fast, a blur of black alloy and crackling energy, its limbs unfolding like a spider's. Jax barely had time to raise his sidearm before it lunged. The shot went wide, plasma scorching the vault wall as the drone closed the distance. Its claw grazed his helmet, leaving a jagged fracture in the visor. "Move faster," he shouted, ducking another swipe. More drones poured in, skittering along the ceiling, the walls, their optics glowing a soulless green. Chen's rifle barked, one shot, two, the recoil jarring his shoulder as a drone exploded in a shower of sparks. "They're hurting us," he yelled, sealing the exits. Voss didn't look back. He grabbed the weapon's core, the harmonics screeching through his bones like a live wire. "Fall back to the ship, now." The words were a growl, a promise. Behind them, the bunker's lights flickered and died, drowned in the static of 100 scrambling signals. The drones didn't need light. They had voices chittering, overlapping, a language of clicks and hisses that made the air itself feel alive. The Odyssey's engines roared to life in the distance, a beacon in the dark, but between them and escape, the shadows moved, not just drones, something bigger. Something waiting. The weapon hummed in Voss's grip, its song rising to a deafening crescendo. It wasn't just a tool, it was a challenge, and the things in the dark had come to answer it. The first drone hit like a scythe through wheat, its segmented limbs slicing clean through a support beam. Metal screamed as the ceiling buckled, raining debris onto the weapon's containment cradle. Kira ducked, fingers never stopping as she wrestled with the access panel, sparks flying as she bypassed security protocols. "It's no good," she shouted over the din. "The activation sequence needs a biometric lock," Kane's DNA. Jax pressed his back to hers, firing blindly into the swarm. "She's gone. We're sitting ducks in here." Then Voss saw it, a glint of glass in the wreckage, Kane's lab coat half buried under twisted metal. The vial in its pocket still held a sliver of crimson, the label smudged but legible, Project Lazarus. "Terminal sample," he lunged, snatching it, as a drone's claw grazed his shoulder, slicing through his suit. Cold flooded the wound, but his grip didn't falter. Kira catch, the vial arced through the chaos, her hand snapping out to grab it. No words, no hesitation. She jammed the glass into the scanner slot, crushing it with her palm. Blood smeared the interface, the machine screeching like a living thing as the weapon's core ignited. Light exploded through the chamber, not the sterile blue of human tech, but a seething, violent gold, the same hue as the alien ship's plasma fire. The drones recoiled, their movements suddenly jerky, disjointed. For a heartbeat, silence. Then the bunker's walls groaned as the harmonics built, shaking loose bolts, cracking concrete. The weapon wasn't just active, it was hungry. Above them, the ceiling split wide open, revealing not the void of space but a writhing, pulsating mass, something vast and dark, anchored to their pursuer's ship by tendrils of crackling energy. It pulsed in time with the weapon's frequency, shuddering as if in pain. Jax's breath fogged his shattered visor. "Oh God," he whispered, "they weren't just chasing us. They were running too." The last thing Voss heard before the world whited out was the sound of the weapon's song twisting into a scream, and the distant, echoing shriek of something much, much older answering back. The pulse tore through the chamber like a shockwave, a ripple of distorted air that sent drones spiraling mid-lunge, their limbs seizing, optics flickering into blackness. For a heartbeat, the bunker was silent. Then Kira's voice cut through the ringing aftermath, raw with triumph. "It's working." The words barely left her lips before the alien ship above them convulsed, its obsidian hull shuddering as fractures of golden light spiderwebbed through its surface. The weapon's resonance climbed higher, a keening wail that made the floor plates vibrate underfoot. But the victory was brittle. Across the chamber, Chen's rifle clattered to the ground as the alien vessel's wounds began sealing themselves, not healing, but rewriting, its surface fluidly rearranging like mercury under a flame. Voss's stomach dropped. "They're evolving," he breathed. Above them, the ship's underbelly split open, revealing a maw of coalescing energy, a cannon unlike anything human tech had ever conceived. It didn't just glow, it devoured the light around it, the air warping in its gravity well. The targeting lock flashed across the Odyssey's external feed, painting their last escape route in pulsing red. Kira's hands flew back to the weapon's controls, her fingers trembling as she wrenched the harmonics higher. "We need more power. It's not enough," the core protested, its song turning ragged, dissonant. Cracks radiated through its casing, spewing arcs of wild energy. Jax grabbed her shoulder. "You'll rip it apart." She didn't stop, couldn't. Not when the cannon's charge hit critical, bathing them all in corpse light. Not when the first tremor rocked the bunker as the Odyssey's engines roared to life somewhere in the tunnels beyond. The weapon was a dying star in her hands, its brilliance scalding. And the alien ship, it watched, waited, not retreating, not attacking, just hovering there as if daring them to strike first. Then the ground fell away beneath them. Not from the cannon's fire, from the weapon's own resonance shattering the lunar rock like glass. The last thing Voss registered was the ceiling collapsing, and the terrible, hungry silence from the thing above as it followed them down into the dark. The console's shrill alarm cut through the cheers like a knife. Kira's fingers hovered over the display where a single word pulsed in blood-red letters: "Incoming." The viewport filled with warp signatures, dozens of them materializing from the void in perfect formation. Not the sleek hunters they'd fought before. These were warships, their hulls scarred from battles older than human civilization, their silhouettes blotting out the stars like a storm front. Voss's hand froze halfway to the comms. The weapon's resonance still hummed through the ship, its golden light painting the bridge in funeral hues. One enemy down, 1,000 more arriving. Jax let out a breath that wasn't quite a laugh. "Guess we got their attention." Then the first transmission hit, not a voice, not even language, just a cascade of images flooding their screens: collapsed cities, scorched battlefields, moons cracked open like eggs. And beneath it all, a rhythm like a heartbeat, slow and inevitable. Chen's knuckles whitened around his rifle. "They're not talking to us," he muttered. Their mourning, the fleet spread across the blackness, their weapons dark, their formation loose, waiting. Volkov's console pinged again, a proximity alert, then a readout that made her blood run cold. "Captain, they're not powering weapons, they're broadcasting." The data stream unfolded, schematics, equations, star maps with routes marked in a script that looked eerily familiar. Too familiar, Voss exhaled slowly. Not a war fleet, a funeral procession, and the weapon in their hold, its harmonic still trembling through the ship, wasn't a tool. It was a eulogy. Then the largest ship fired, not plasma, not missiles, a beam of pure white light that washed over the Odyssey like a tide, illuminating every seam, every scar. The crew braced for annihilation until the light resolved into holograms, figures, hundreds of them, standing shoulder to shoulder on the bridge, their faces strained with quiet resolve. Humans not in uniforms, but in the tattered remains of lab coats, flight suits, civilian clothes. The last broadcasts of a dead world, the real message from Earth. Jax reached out, his gloved hand passing through the image of a young woman mouthing silent words. They knew, he breathed, they knew what was coming. The alien fleet's lights pulsed once, in unison, not a threat, a salute. Then, as one, they turned, not toward the Odyssey, but toward the void beyond Pluto, where the darkness rippled like a curtain in the wind. Waiting, watching, Kira's voice was barely audible above the weapon's dying hum. "We weren't the prey, were we?" Voss didn't answer. The console between them lit up with a new set of coordinates, not from the aliens, but from Earth's old defense grid, still dutifully transmitting after all these years. The path led straight into the trembling dark. Outside, the stars began to wink out, one by one by one. The void between stars shattered as the alien armada emerged, dozens of ships sliding into real space with eerie synchronicity, their black hulls drinking the light. Jax's breath fogged his visor. "This is it," he murmured, fingers tightening around the weapon's cracked casing. Voss didn't hesitate. His hand slammed down on the comm panel, broadcasting Kane's date to drive in a furious burst every schematic, every harmonic frequency the weapon's heart laid bare. "If we die," he said softly, "they die with us." For 3 heartbeats, stillness. Then the fleet pivoted as one, their formations unraveling like thread pulled taut, not toward the Odyssey, but toward the glittering speck of dead Earth hanging in the black. Kira's gasp crackled over the calm. They're going for the source. Voss's lips curled. Exactly. The Odyssey's engines roared to life, chasing the swarm as it tore through the void. Behind them, Pluto's wreckage faded into the dark. Ahead, Earth's corpse grew larger, its continent still scarred by the fires of a century past. But it wasn't the ruins that made Chen's pulse spike. It was the pulse faint, buried deep in the planet's crust, beating in perfect sync with the weapon's dying hum. "Captain," he whispered, "it's not a graveyard down there. It's a hive." The first alien ship hit the atmosphere in a streak of violet fire, its descent too controlled, too deliberate, not an invasion, a homecoming. Voss watched the feed, his reflection fractured in the cracked viewscreen. Kane's last gift wasn't a weapon, it was a compass, and now they'd see where it led. The Odyssey plunged after them, into the ash and the whispers of a world that hadn't been silent after all. Earth's horizon burned amber through the cracked viewport, its once blue skies choked by the ghostly glow of the crater below. The alien fleet descended in eerie silence, their ships hovering just above the ruins like carrion birds circling a kill. Voss's fingers tightened around the weapon's activation module, its surface slick with condensation from the failing life support. "Kane's coordinates are dead on," Kira murmured, her breath fogging the scanner as it mapped the crater's depths. The energy signatures weren't just strong, they were alive, pulsing like a heartbeat beneath the rubble. Then the lights died. Every console on the bridge flickered once before plunging into darkness, leaving only the bloody glare of emergency strips. The Odyssey lurched, its stabilizers groaning as something ripped through the thruster array. That wasn't turbulence, Chen spat, already sprinting for the armory locker. Jax's med scanner flared to life in the gloom, its beam cutting across the deck and the footprints. Fresh damp leading toward the engine room, his stomach twisted. "We've got a stowaway." The ship shuddered again, this time with the unmistakable screech of metal tearing. Not from outside, from within. Voss didn't need to give the order. The crew moved as one, weapons drawn, toward the aft corridor where the shadows clung too thickly. Something dripped from the ceiling vents, not water, something viscous and shimmering like liquid obsidian. It hit the deck with a sound like a whisper. Kira's gloves squeaked against the weapon's casing as she adjusted its harmonics, her voice low. "If they're already on board, they know what we're carrying." The implication hung unspoken. The weapon wasn't just a threat, it was a beacon, and whatever waited in the crater below wasn't just watching, it was calling them home. Then the first scream echoed through the vents, human but wrong, frayed at the edges as if the throat producing it had forgotten how to shape the sound. The crew froze. There were no other humans left on Earth, at least none that should have been able to scream. Jax's scanner chirped, its screen flashing a single word in Kane's handwriting, pulled from some deep archive, convergence. The ship's failing light strobed, casting jagged shadows that didn't match the crew's movements, shadows that reached back. Voss armed the weapon, the core lit up gold, its song trembling through the deck plates. "We hit the crater," he said, eyes locked on the corridor ahead where something was now breathing in the dark. Nothing else matters, but the Odyssey groaned in protest, its systems dying one by one. And beneath their feet, the hive stirred. The air turned thick with the stench of ozone and something older, wet earth and rusted metal, as the figure stepped into the flickering light. It wore Kane's face, but the skin rippled like water, features dissolving and reforming between blinks. "You are persistent," it said, her voice spliced with a chorus of whispers beneath. Voss didn't hesitate. His sidearm barked 3 times, the shots punching clean through its chest without so much as a flinch. The hole sealed instantly, edges writhing with black filaments. "We are Legion," it sighed, tilting its head as if amused. Kira was already moving, her fingers dancing across the emergency override panel. "Jax with me now." The cargo bay doors hissed shut, trapping the thing inside just as its form shuddered, elongating into something too tall for the corridor. The lock indicator blinked red, then began pulsing faster. 5 minutes, Kira panted, wiping sweat from her brow. Maybe less. Outside the viewport, the crater's glow intensified, veins of gold threading through the ruins like roots. Chen's rifle clattered to the floor. "It's leading us there," he muttered, like moths to a dam lantern. Jax's med scanner flared to life, its beam cutting through the gloom to reveal tendrils of shadow creeping along the ceiling, not from the cargo bay but from the vents. The thing wasn't just in the hold, it was in the walls, the ship itself, and the crater below wasn't just glowing, it was breathing. The dropship's landing struts hit the crater floor with a crunch, sinking slightly into the spongy surface, not rock, not soil, but something organic that pulsed faintly beneath their boots. Bioluminescence bled through the cavern walls in thick, vein-like tendrils, their glow syncing with the rhythmic thrum of the weapon strapped to Voss's back. Chen wiped his visor, smearing a streak of glowing residue. "It's not a cave," he muttered. "It's a throat." Jax's scanner flared red as they advanced, mapping the cavern's contours, too symmetrical, too deliberate. The tendrils recoiled at their approach, retracting into the walls like startled eels before lashing back, thicker this time. One grazed Kira's arm, and her suit's alarm blared, containment breach. The readout flashed, biological assimilation in progress. She tore the tendril free, her breath ragged. "Move faster." Above them, the stowaway's voice crackled through their comms, no longer mimicking Kane but something infinitely older. "You are echoes," it whispered, the words slithering between frequencies. "Echoes of a dead world clutching at weapons you do not understand." The dropship's cameras flickered to life behind them, showing the vessel's hull dissolving, melting into the crater's embrace like sugar in water. Voss didn't slow. The cavern narrowed, the tendrils coiling into a spiraling path that led downward, always downward. The weapon's timer chimed softly in his ear. 5 minutes. Then 4. The air grew heavier, thicker, until each step felt like wading through tar. A chamber yawned open ahead, its ceiling lost in shadow. At its center hung a massive, pulsing core, not machine, not flesh, but both, its surface rippling with half-formed faces. Human faces, some he recognized from Earth's final broadcasts. Others wore Kane's features, their mouths moving in silent unison. Jax's legs gave out. "God, they didn't just kill us, they archived us." The stowaway's laughter echoed, a sound like breaking glass. "You cannot win." Voss unbuckled the weapon, its casing already cracking under the core's gravitational pull. The timer hit 3 minutes too. He met Kira's gaze, then Chen's. No words, just the unspoken truth. Some fires burn clean enough to light the way home. The cavern shrieked as he plunged the weapon into the core, not to destroy, to answer. Light erupted, not the weapon's gold, but a blinding, perfect white. And for the first time in a century, Earth's silence broke. The detonation tore through the hive like a star-going supernova, light so brilliant it seared through their retinas, even through sealed visors. For a fraction of a second, Voss saw everything. The cavern's grotesque anatomy laid bare, the writhing tendrils snapping like overstretched cables, the core's pulsating mass convulsing as the weapon's harmonics shredded its cohesion. Then the shockwave hit. It wasn't just sound, it was a physical force, a psychic scream vibrating through their bones, their teeth, the very marrow of them. Jax's voice cut through the chaos, raw with static. "Go now." Kira was already hauling Chen toward the dropship, his leg dragging a trail of glowing fluid where a tendril had latched on. The vessel's engines coughed, sputtered, then roared to life just as the cavern ceiling began to collapse in great gelatinous chunks. Something wet and massive sloughed off the walls behind them, hitting the ground with a sound like 1,000 hands clapping. Voss lunged for the closing ramp, the weapon's empty casing still clutched in his grip. Its job done, its song silenced. Above them, the sky was chaos. Alien ships spiraled like leaves in a storm, their sleek formations dissolving into panicked collisions. One veered too close to the crater's edge, its hull scraping against the collapsing rock before tipping into the abyss. Another listed sideways, its navigation lights strobing erratically before plowing into a third vessel in a shower of violet flame. The hive's psychic shriek had become a chain reaction, a feedback loop tearing through their connected consciousness. Inside the dropship, Jack slammed his fist against the throttle, sending them hurtling skyward as the crater's rim folded inward like a dying star. Kira's fingers flew over the nav console, rerouting power to the buckling stabilizers. "They're not just crashing," she breathed, watching the scanners paint the devastation. "They're unraveling." Chen slumped against the bulkhead, his face slick with sweat. "So we killed the Queen." Voss stared at the dwindling wreckage below, the last flickers of gold fading into the collapsing earth. The weapon hadn't just destroyed. It had answered, and the silence that followed wasn't empty, it was waiting. The Odyssey shuddered as it broke orbit, its mangled hull groaning under the strain. Kira's fingers trembled over the sensor array, the screen painting a graveyard of twisted metal where the alien fleet had been. "Did we do it?" Her voice was hoarse, barely audible over the creaking bulkheads. Voss didn't answer. His eyes were locked on the comm panel where a flickering transmission fought through the static Earth's final beacon, repeating on loop. Kane's voice, worn thin by decades of playback, whispered through the speakers. "You were our hope." Then silence. Jack stiffened. That's not the original message. The words hung in the air, cold and wrong. Before anyone could react, the AI's voice sliced through the tension. Incoming transmission. The main screen fizzed to life, revealing not the expected wreckage of the hive but a live feed, an orbital view of Earth's surface where the crater had been. Now it pulsed with a slow, rhythmic light like a heartbeat. No, not a heartbeat, a countdown. "That's not possible," Chen breathed. "We saw it collapse." Kara zoomed in, the image resolving into something worse. The crater wasn't gone. It had grown, its edges spreading like ink in water, tendrils of blackened earth reaching toward the ruins of old cities. And at its center, something new, a spire, jagged and obsidian, piercing the sky. The transmission stuttered again, Kane's voice distorting, warping into a chorus of whispers. "You were our hope," it repeated, but this time the words twisted into something else entirely, a command, or maybe a warning. The AI's next words sent ice down Voss's spine. "Signal origin, terrestrial, transmission type, not human." Outside the viewport, the debris field shifted, not drifting aimlessly, converging. Then the first piece of wreckage twitched. The transmission stuttered, then resolved into a grainy image. Kane, decades younger, her hair streaked with ash instead of gray, staring into the lens with a rawness the crew had never seen. Behind her, a lab in ruins, walls scorched by plasma burns. "If you're seeing this," she said, voice stripped of its usual calm, "the weapon worked, but they're not gone." A flicker of movement off camera made her flinch. "They're sleeping." The feed distorted, then a star map burned across the screen. No human system, no charted space, just a cluster of coordinates pulsing like a heartbeat at the edge of the void. "Find them before they wake." Static swallowed the rest. The bridge was so silent they could hear the drip of coolant from a ruptured pipe. Chen broke the stillness first, his rifle clattering to the deck. "That wasn't recorded during the war," he whispered. "That was last week." The timestamp in the corner confirmed it, fresh footage disguised in an old Earth transmission shell. Voss's fingers curled around the weapon's shattered casing, the edges biting into his palm. He could taste the truth before he said it, bitter as gunpowder. "We didn't end anything." The comm panel lit up not with an incoming signal, but with a single line of text scrolling endlessly. Kane's last words looping into the dark. "Find them. Find them, find them." Outside the viewport, the debris field shifted again, drawn toward the spire like iron filings to a magnet. Jax's med scanner chimed, its screen flashing with a new alert, biological resonance detected. The hive wasn't dead, it was dreaming, and in the depths of that dream, something had just stirred. Kira's hands flew to the nav console, her voice a blade in the silence. We need to move. The coordinates burned in their retinas, a trail of breadcrumbs leading beyond the edge of known space, toward whatever had made the aliens run. Toward whatever had made Earth desperate enough to build a weapon that could sing a hive to sleep. Voss exhaled, the weight of it settling over them all. Not a victory, not even a battle, just the first shot in a war they'd already been losing for 100 years. The Odyssey groaned as its engines flared to life, turning its broken hull toward the dark between stars. Behind them, the spire pulsed once, twice, then went quiet, waiting. The Odyssey's bridge hummed with tension, thick enough to choke on. Kira's knuckles whitened around the nav console's edge, her voice stripped raw. "We're not soldiers, we're scraps." The star map glowed between them, Kane's coordinates pulsing like an infected wound at the edge of known space. One dropship, half a crew, and a weapon casing full of scrap metal. That's not an army, it's a funeral procession. Jax didn't look up from the med scanner, its screen painting his face in sickly green. The readout hadn't changed since the crater, biological contamination, 9%. "And what happens when they finish digesting Earth?" he asked softly. "When they wake up hungry?" His thumb brushed the cracked casing of Kane's data drive, still smeared with her blood. "We're the only ones who know where their nest is." Voss said nothing. His reflection floated in the viewport, superimposed over the receding speck of their dead world. Behind him, the AI's voice slithered through the silence, toneless and final. "Fuel reserves at 12.6%. Navigation options nearest habitable system, 37 years at current burn. Alternative trajectory requires 89% remaining reserves." A pause. The unspoken verdict hung heavier than radiation. Chen slammed his fist into the bulkhead, the sound ringing through the deck. "So we limp to some rock and wait to starve, or we do what Kane begged us to." His glare cut to the coordinates, then to the weapon's hollow shell bolted to the floor. "That thing sang them to sleep. Imagine what it could do if we rebuilt it at the source." Static crackled through the comms, no signal, just the ghost of interference, a whisper that might have been words. Kira exhaled hard. "Even if we had the parts, even if we had the time, we'd be flying straight into the dark with a flashlight." Voss finally turned from the stars. His face was a graveyard. "We've been in the dark for 100 years. The AI chimed again, a single note like a funeral bell. No options left, just a choice. The crew's silence was answer enough. Outside, the void stretched endless and cold. Ahead, the coordinates burned, and deep in the ship's bones, something that wasn't metal grown. The Odyssey's emergency lights bathed engineering in a pulsing red haze as Kira's fingers flew across the console, rerouting power with brutal efficiency. Alarms shrieked, their warnings lost under the metallic groan of stressed conduits. "You're killing us," Jax snarled over the comms, his voice cracking with static. Kira didn't look up. "Better than letting Earth's ghosts do it for us." The console sparked as she punched in the final sequence, random jump coordinates flaring across the screen. Somewhere deeper in the ship, something ruptured with a sound like tearing flesh. Voss hit the manual override so hard the panel cracked, but the damage was already metastasizing through the system. Navigation arrays shorted out in cascading failure, their screens dissolving into pixelated static. "She fried the whole grid," Jax muttered, wiping sweat from his brow. The ship lurched, its thrusters firing erratically as the autopilot struggled to compensate. Outside the viewport, stars smeared into streaks, not from warp but from the ship's drunken spiral. Then the proximity alert sliced through the chaos like a scalpel. A ship, not one of the twisted hive vessels, sleeker, older, its silhouette flickered on the scanner, half cloaked in some kind of interference field. No transponder, no hail, just the quiet, terrible certainty of being watched. Jax's med scanner chirped, its biometric overlay glitching, but not before flashing a single, impossible reading. "Human life signs from the stranger's hull." Kira's voice crackled over the comm one last time, stripped of defiance, hollow as a bone flute. "You wanted answers," she whispered. Guess they found us first. The static that followed wasn't empty, it breathed. The scavenger ship loomed in the viewport, its hull patched with mismatched plating that gave it the look of a starving predator, all jagged edges and exposed teeth. Its docking clamp locked onto the Odyssey with a shudder, the sound of grinding metal echoing through the battered corridors. When the airlock hissed open, the man who stepped through was less a captain and more a specter of deep space. Rook's face was a roadmap of scars, his eyes twin chips of flint in the dim emergency lighting. "Heard your distress call," he said, voice like gravel under a boot, though calls generous for static and screaming. Voss kept his hand near his sidearm, the weight of it cold against his thigh. "We need repairs, supplies." Rook's grin was a knife slash. "And I need a reason not to strip your carcass and leave you drifting." His crew shifted behind him, their silhouettes lean and restless. "But I'm feeling sentimental. Hand over the schematics for that toy you used to scorch the hive, and we'll call it charity." Jax's breath hitched, his fingers tightening around the med scanner. He didn't need to speak for Voss to hear the warning screaming in his head. "Deal," Voss said, too smooth, too quick. Rook's chuckle was dry as vacuum. "Thought you'd haggle." He turned, gesturing for his crew to start unloading repair gear. As they filed past, Jax leaned in, his whisper barely audible over the clatter of tools. "You trust him?" Voss watched Rook's back, the way the man's spine stiffened just slightly when the Odyssey's AI flickered to life with a broken chirp. "No." Outside the viewport, the scavenger ship's engines idled, their hum too steady, too quiet for a vessel that ragged, waiting, always waiting, and deep in the Odyssey's belly, the weapon's shattered casing pulsed once, faint as a dying man's heartbeat. Rook's grin twisted into something jagged as the barrel of his pistol leveled at Voss's chest. "Funny thing about scavengers," he said, the words dripping like coolant from a cracked pipe. "We always check the vents." Behind him, his crew raised their weapons in unison, the clatter of safeties clicking off echoing through the corridor. Kira's voice crackled over the comms, strained and distant, cut off mid-sentence as the scavengers jammed the signal. The data drive gleamed in Rook's free hand, its casing still smeared with Kane's blood. Gunfire erupted like a severed power conduit, plasma bolts painting the walls in searing streaks. Chen went down first, a round grazing his temple as he dove for cover. Jax barely yanked him behind a support beam in time, the metal hissing where the next shot struck. Engineering's locked down. Kira's voice surged back through the static, raw with fury. "They rigged the doors. I'm trapped." Voss didn't hesitate. He lunged, not for Rook, but for the sparking console beside him, slamming his palm onto the emergency protocols. The ship's AI wailed to life, its voice fractured. Warning, core overload initiated. Rook's eyes widened. "You suicidal bastard." Kira's laughter crackled through the chaos, sharp as a vibroblade. "If we can't have it, neither can you." Light strobed crimson as the countdown flashed across every screen, 10 seconds to detonation. The scavengers scattered, their boots skidding on the deck as they bolted for their ship. Rook snarled, his free hand clawing at the date. To drive, then froze as Jax's hacked override pulsed through the system, the numbers stuttering, freezing at 2. For a heartbeat, silence. Then the Odyssey's hull groaned like a living thing, the vibrations shuddering up through their bones. "That's not the core," Jax breathed, his fingers still flying across his stolen scavenger tablet. "That's them." Outside the viewport, Rook's ship disengaged, its thrusters flaring but not fast enough. The first tendril punched through its hull like a spear, black and glistening. The hive hadn't been sleeping, it had been following. Voss's hand closed around Chen's arm, hauling him upright. "We need to go now." The last thing they saw before the dropship's hatch sealed was the scavenger vessel cracking open like an egg, its innards spilling into the void in a swirl of metal and screams. The dropship's engines screamed as it tore free from the Odyssey's dying hull, the explosion lighting up the void behind them in a bloom of white-hot fury. Metal fragments pinged against their shields like hail. each impact a reminder of how close they'd cut it. Kira's fingers dug into the navigation console, her knuckles white as she wrestled with the scavenger ship's unfamiliar controls. "This thing's held together with spit and prayers," she muttered, her voice tight. The cockpit stank of burnt wiring and stale sweat, the air thick with the static of damaged comms. Chen slumped into the co-pilot's seat, his temple still oozing blood where the scavenger's round had grazed him. "Rook's boys really loved their duct tape," he groaned, yanking a frayed cable from under the dashboard. The ship shuddered, its warp drive sputtering like a dying animal. Jax's med scanner chirped, a warning about the leaking radiation from their patched-up fuel lines. "We've got maybe 2 jumps left in this wreck," he said, his voice hollow. "Then we're floating debris." Kira didn't look up from the star map, Kane's coordinates glowing an accusing red at the edge of the screen. "You're really doing this?" Her question hung in the air, sharp as a knife. Voss exhaled, his breath fogging the cracked view screen where the Odyssey's wreckage still burned. "We finish what she started." His thumb hovered over the warp trigger. No fanfare, no grand speech, just the quiet certainty of a man who'd already signed his own death warrant. The ship lurched into warp, the stars stretching into streaks, and behind them the hive's twisted silhouette flickered at the edge of the explosion's glow. Not chasing, watching, some fires didn't need tending to spread. The scavenger ship shuddered as it dropped out of warp, its jury-rigged engines coughing plasma like a dying man's last breath. The star ahead burned dim and sullen, its light barely reaching the planet that clung to it, a world sheathed in writhing black tendrils, their surfaces glistening under the ship's spotlights like oil on water. Jax's fingers tightened around the armrests of his chair. "This is it," he whispered, his breath fogging the cracked view screen. Kira's scanner flared red, its display fizzing with static before resolving into jagged peaks of energy signatures. "They're already waking up," she said, her voice eerily calm. The readings pulsed in time with the planet's motion, like a slow, steady heartbeat beneath the veins of rotten flesh. Chen wiped blood from his temple, his face pale under the flickering console lights. So much for the element of surprise. Voss didn't hesitate. His hands moved over the scavenger ship's weapons console with a grim familiarity, powering up the pitiful array of patched-together cannons and jury-rigged torpedo tubes. "Then we hit them first," he growled. The ship groaned in protest as its systems strained under the sudden load, the deck vibrating beneath their feet like a live wire. Outside, the tendrils shifted, not recoiling, not retreating, just turning, as if the planet itself had blinked awake and fixed its gaze on them. The silence that followed was worse than any alarm. No klaxons, no warning, just the slow, certain knowledge that something ancient and hungry had noticed them. Kira's fingers hovered over the firing controls. "We get one shot at this," she said, her voice barely audible over the thrum of the overloading reactor. "Make it count." The first volley streaked toward the planet, plasma rounds cutting through the gloom like falling stars, only to vanish into the black without so much as a ripple. The tendrils didn't burn, didn't flinch, they parted, swallowing the attack whole. Jax's med scanner shrieked, its screen flashing a single, impossible word: adapting. Then the planet pulsed, not light, not sound, just a ripple through the fabric of space itself, a shudder that traveled up through the ship's hull and into their bones. The viewscreen shattered, not from impact, but from the sheer wrongness of the signal tearing through it. Voss's mouth moved, forming words lost under the screech of metal rending itself apart. One thought cut through the chaos like a blade. The hive hadn't been sleeping. It had been waiting, and now it was laughing. The scavenger ship screamed through the atmosphere, its hull scorching black as it carved a fiery path toward the writhing mass below. Plasma fire spat from its cannons, searing through tendrils that recoiled only to surge back thicker, angrier, their surfaces glistening with something like recognition. "They're learning," Kira hissed, her hands white-knuckled on the controls. The swarm erupted from the planet's surface, a storm of jagged silhouettes that blotted out the sickly sun. Alarms shrieked as the first impacts rattled the ship, the deck plates buckling under the assault. Shields at 8%, Chen barked, blood from his temple, wound smearing across the flickering damage readout. Voss didn't flinch. His fingers danced over the reactor's overload panel, bypassing safeties with brutal efficiency. The core's whine climbed to a teeth-rattling shriek, its vents spewing radioactive steam. "We're not gonna make it," Kira whispered, her voice almost lost in the cacophony. Voss grinned, a sharp, feral thing. "We don't have to." He slammed his palm onto the nav console, coordinates flashing crimson. "Jump us right into the heart." Jax's hand froze over the controls. For a heartbeat, the chaos seemed to hold its breath. Then his fist came down like a hammer, punching in the suicide burn. The warp drive howled, its failing harmonics tearing at the fabric of space. Outside, the swarm convulsed, tendrils lashing toward the ship with desperate, grasping fury. Too late. The last thing the hive saw was the blinding light of a dying star rushing to meet it. The explosion wasn't silent. It ripped through the hive's core with a scream that twisted metal and shattered bone, a supernova of white-hot fury consuming everything in its path. The scavenger ship vaporized on impact, its atoms scattering like dust in a hurricane, but not before its dying warp core tore open a wound in reality itself. For 3 heartbeats, the planet glowed from within. Its writhing tendrils illuminated like veins under skin, then collapsed inward, folding into nothingness with a soundless implosion. Darkness swallowed the view screen, not the quiet dark of space, but something heavier, thicker, as if the universe itself had held its breath. Months later, a scavenger vessel named the Rusted Nail drifted through the corpse of the battlefield, its spotlights cutting through the debris. Captain Nessa Marlowe leaned forward in her chair, fingers tightening around the armrests as the scanners pinged a single pod, its hull scorched but intact, tumbling through the wreckage. "That's no life sign," her first mate muttered, but Nessa had already turned the ship. The pod hissed open to reveal not a body, but a data drive nestled in the ruins of a flight suit, its casing cracked but still pulsing faint blue. When she slotted it into her console, the voice that crackled through the speakers wasn't static. It was Kane's, not the broken transmission they'd all heard looping from dead Earth. This was crisp, clear, deliberate. The message was never for help, a pause, the kind that settles into marrow. It was a warning. The feed cut to star charts, to schematics of the weapon, to coordinates leading deeper into the black than any human ship had ever ventured. And beneath it all, a timestamp, not from the war, from 3 days ago. Nessa's hand hovered over the comms, ready to call for reinforcements until the static shifted. Not random noise, a pattern, a pulse, the same harmonic frequency the weapon had sung before it burned. The screen went black. Then, for the first time in months, a new signal flared to life on the edge of known space, one that matched the drive's coordinates exactly. Out there in the dark, something was answering.